Hey everybody, Eric Grenier here, and welcome to the 129th episode of the Writ Podcast. The Toronto St. Paul's by-election ensured that this political summer would be heated. Tensions within the Liberal Party are higher than they seem to have been since Justin Trudeau became leader in 2013, as there are increasing calls for some plan forward after the by-election defeat, or even for the Prime Minister's resignation. So there's lots of chat about this week, so the pollster panel is back, at least for now, 2 out of 3. We'll see if James is going to be joining. He might be on a dock somewhere, but Dan Arnold is Chief Strategy Officer at Pollara and worked as Director of Research and Advertising in the Prime Minister's office and polled for the Trudeau Liberals in each of the past 3 elections. Andrew Enns is Executive Vice President at Léger, polled for the Federal Conservatives during the Harper years, and has polled for provincial Conservative parties across Canada. Dan, Andrew, good to have you back.
Good to be back. Happy to be here.
We've had a little bit of time now to digest the results of Toronto St. Paul, so we don't need to get into too much detail in terms of them. But with the little bit of a step back, having some time to think about it over the last week, Dan, what are the big takeaways? What were your reactions to the results when you saw them?
Yeah, I'll apologize off the top here, Eric. You said we're going to talk about the big by-election today. I assumed you were talking about Tuxedo. The media just hasn't been covering St. Paul's too much, so it slipped my mind that this even happened. So I'll try to pull something off the top of my head here, but I haven't done a lot of prep work on this. Like people are talking about this as a wake-up call. If it is a wake-up call, it's an 11 a.m. wake-up call in the sense that Liberals should have been wide awake well before this. It's not surprising. It's, I think, fairly consistent with the polling. I saw in your by-election preview, I mean, the Liberals basically hit the top end of the range that you put for them, and the Conservatives shot well above their top end. So, that's why what could have been a 3 or 4 5-point win turns into a 2-point loss. But once you figure in that Carolyn Bennett's not running again, I think it's not outside of what we kind of came to expect from the public opinion environment that we're in these days. So I wouldn't look at this as being any more important than other data points that are out there, because all the other data points that are out there already show the Liberals are in a very bad position. But I think it's fair to say that in politics, something can become important just by virtue of people treating it as important. And it's kind of like in golf, right? Like, I don't think the Masters is any more magical than any other golf tournament. It's not a better predictor of who the best golfer is than any other golf tournament. But if everyone treats the Masters as a very important tournament, it becomes a big deal. And if you win it, it becomes a very important thing. So, I think because the media has hyped it up, because all the politicos have sort of hyped up St. Paul's as being a big deal, it becomes a big deal. And I think that, kind of sets up a difficult summer for Trudeau of caucus angst and a lot of, media scrutiny on him.
Dan, just stick with you for a second. I know you've given presentations to the caucus and that kind of thing. Is this a question of, numbers guys like us who would have understood that this was something that could happen and what it means, and a win or a loss is less important than the movement in the numbers, versus a lot of MPs who maybe, aren't as numerate, and just the fact that they lost was enough to say, oh, wow, we're in trouble?
Yeah, I think so. I think it does feel more real, I guess. Polls people can kind of hand wave away to some extent, even as the Prime Minister tried to do on Power and Politics a while ago, right? So I think actually seeing the results has a more stronger psychological impact. Even though, again, I don't think one by-election tells us anything more than all the other polling that we've seen in the past. It just feels different, I think. And Trudeau has never lost the by-election of a riding that the Liberals held going into it, which is a very impressive record as a prime minister. So this is new for people, and I think when something new happens, it has a bigger impact. You kind of become desensitized to week after week of bad poll, and you kind of get used to the environment, whereas this is something that actually I think does catch people's attention a bit more, because it's not something that's happened to the Liberals before. It happens to a lot of governments, it happens to most governments, but it's new for this caucus to see something like this.
Andrew, what was your takeaway from these results?
Well, I mean, I won't sort of regurgitate the media and reporting of it. I mean, obviously for the Conservatives, it was good news. I think to echo kind of what Dan said from the Liberal side, it was hard to see how this was going to be good for the Liberals, and on the reverse, I don't think this was going to be a bad result for the Conservatives. No matter, the result could have been flipped. The Liberals win by 3 or 4 points. I don't think the narrative would change a whole heck of a lot. This was, a clear demonstration of sort of the conservative support. And I think for some people, and why it sort of generated maybe more, because I agree with Dan. I mean, it's one by-election, and governments, as Dan pointed out, typically do lose these more often than not, especially as they're getting on in their term. But this one, took on extra weight because it was a demonstration of support for Pierre Poilievre and his message in an area where, if I had to put it, I think the ratio of EV vehicles to pickup trucks is not conducive to electing Tories. And but there it was. And I think there's also there's subplots now that I don't think necessarily bear out in an actual campaign, but they're going to be little threads that people will pick on, like the Jewish vote in the riding. It was, I mean, I have a few staff who live in that riding, and, they were motivated, quite frankly, in this election, and motivated positively toward the Conservatives, which wasn't certainly not the case for many decades, I would argue. And so, that little subplot, the whole Middle East Gaza thing, that'll be one thing that'll get people talking, and it'll get some caucus members, muttering to themselves in terms of what it means and things like that. It's. I do also wonder about the way it was sort of managed. Like, I think this early on, and Dan, you may have insight on this, but I think early on, I think the Liberals saw trouble here with this riding when Carolyn Bennett said, I'm out. And they dragged it out. I think at one point there were some questions asked, why wasn't this by-election called with a couple of others that were held earlier in the year? By sort of leaving it to this point, right at the end of the summer, it's the only thing going. The House is gone. Like, you are setting yourself up for this being a really big story when there's really not much else to talk about. And I think it also does, unfortunately, it makes for a pretty long summer, because this is how you go in, and this is what the barbecue conversation is going to be about. And it also starts to put a focal point on, I think there's 3 or 4 other by-elections that are probably going to come due in the next, by the end of the year or early into next, that will also now, have some added attention in terms of what could happen.
Dan, what was behind the timing, or what would have been behind it? Obviously, as Andrew says, coming at the summer kind of kicks off a bad summer. But at the same time, there isn't a lot of caucus members walking around Parliament Hill that can be interviewed by the media right now.
Yeah, and I think, the 2 considerations, I guess, on timing would be, one, when do you think you have the best chance to win it? So, you could call it earlier. Maybe they were waiting for things to get better after the budget. And, I think that was probably something that was going through people's heads. I think then you're also thinking about sort of, yeah, like you said, the fallout from it. If it doesn't go well, when's the better time to, try to bury that? And again, you can make the case both ways, that if there's other things going on, then maybe it moves on. But then having to deal with the caucus meetings the week afterwards may not have been so great, and maybe this is better in that respect. So it's, I think it's hard to say, but I think ultimately, from by-election timing, from my experience, when we were thinking about timing of by-elections, it usually came down to, when do we have a candidate in place who's ready, who's got the organization, the team, and ready to roll, is the first base criterion. The second one is like, what's the best optimal time to win it based on other factors that are out there. And then you start thinking about layering them together. And this one was on Saint Jean-Baptiste Day, so do you call the Quebec one, or do you slide them into July? There's a lot of kind of calculus that goes into these things for when you want to do them.
Okay, well, let's get into what's happened since then. So we haven't had a chorus of calls for resignation from the caucus. The only one that is a pretty explicit one was it came from Wayne Long. There's been a few others who have, kind of couched their responses, or at least didn't even give much of a response when it came to the question of leadership. It's clear that there does seem to be a lot of people within caucus that want to have an emergency meeting to go over the results, figure out what they're going to do going forward. Dan, how big of a deal is what we've been hearing out of the caucus?
Um, yeah, look, we'll have to see how it evolves over the summer. I think it's a big deal in the sense that this is again something that Trudeau hasn't experienced to this level before, and if yeah, why I say if, but like let's be honest, the whole summer media cycle is going to be basically questions swirling around this, right? Which makes it difficult for him again to get any other kind of message out. And honestly, every event he does, if this is what he's asked about, it's not a good news story because just questions around uncertainty of leadership, questions around caucus frustration is never going to be a good news story, right? So I think it certainly is a more than a 1 day story, and anytime you have a lingering negative news story, that's problematic. In the scheme of things, look, it's less than what Blaine Higgs is dealing with in terms of a caucus rebellion if you're kind of layering them up, but we don't know what the level is going to be like by the end of the summer. So even these kind of hedged comments are not helpful, obviously. Yeah.
Andrew, does this compare at all to sort of the last days of the Harper government in terms of caucus unrest, or is there anything similar between the last days of the Harper government and how caucus was feeling and how the Liberals seem to be feeling right now?
No, actually, there were I remember stories in the media wondering why there wasn't a bit more caucus grumbling. I mean, by this at this juncture in Stephen Harper's last term, I mean, certainly some of the stakeholder groups, some of the negatives were piling up on him, and there was a growing sort of mood for change in the country. But from a caucus perspective, I mean, the other thing I'll just add is that we were dealing with kind of some of the Duffy, that fallout out of the Senate and some hearings going on and some senior staff. But quite, I would say, somewhat remarkably, but also somewhat in the sentiment of the polling. I mean, the polling wasn't great for Stephen Harper in the last, but it wasn't terrible. I mean, that election was not out of reach, in part because and Dan will know this as well, but going into that campaign, I mean, the NDP were still riding fairly high. The Liberals were gaining traction, and certainly they had a new leader that we certainly saw had the potential to be problematic, but he was still a new leader. The party itself was still kind of gaining traction and was still well back and organizationally and financially, I think, still sort of catching up. So I think there wasn't that same sentiment that there was big trouble. There was still a view that this could be an election that could be won. There were some challenges internally with some staff in the PMO, but some changes were made, at that front as well. So I don't think the same level of discontent was there. You still had a lot of the MPs were planning to reoffer, and quite a few did reoffer. I mean, a few cabinet ministers moved on, but I don't think there was big surprises on some of them. I think when you think back to what this means today, I mean, I think that's where some of the implications of this uncertainty around the leader and what happens with the party, it'll put a bit of a chill on candidate recruitment, particularly some of the potentially some big names, because they may have some views in terms of who they want to, do they want to run under the Trudeau banner, or are they interested in something different? There's, in the hedged comments category, there's sort of views that, well, there'll be a lot of Liberals won't reoffer, which, I went through that here in Manitoba in the last provincial campaign. There was just a slew of progressive conservative MLAs that didn't reoffer, and they saw the writing on the wall. It's not that's, again, it's not good media story because they tend to look at, folks are getting off the sinking ship. The reality is, politically, you can manage that. I mean, you can, in a lot of cases in ridings, I mean, a new face is not a bad thing to have, especially if you've been there for a while. So, but it can continue that narrative that the Liberals are foundering and stuff like that. But
So if they do have an emergency caucus meeting over the next few while, I think the next one is scheduled to be at the end of August or in September or something like that, which seems like a long way off. Dan, if you were presenting to this meeting and you could take the numbers in any way that you wanted, what would the presentation be? That a change is needed, that a change would not work, that there is a path? What do the numbers show would be the sensible path forward for the party?
Yeah, I think I'd respectfully decline to present if they invite me to come to the it's not an emergency caucus meeting this summer. It could be a not too fun. I mean, unless it's at a nice location. I mean, it could be a nice trip to wherever if they're doing it somewhere sunny and warm. But yeah, so I think if whether or not the next caucus meeting is this summer or the scheduled one in September, August, I think what caucus will be looking for is just some kind of hope that there is a plan to win the next election campaign. And I think, for what Trudeau needs to get together and his team need to get together in the lead up to whenever the next caucus meeting is something that is a convincing plan to show them that they know this is how we're going to define Poilievre, this is how the seats we're going to win, this is the target, this is the, we're getting candidates nominated, and just sort of give them the confidence that yes, things are not good right now, but there is hope for the future. So I think from a research perspective, it wouldn't be very useful to get up there and just say, hey, no, like our polling shows we're only down by 15 points, not 19 points, guys. Like, don't believe what you're reading. That wouldn't really give people any kind of confidence. I think what they would need to see is, research that shows these are some vulnerabilities of Poilievre's, and then the campaign team can talk about this is how we're going to exploit them in the campaign. Maybe we've got some videos ready to go. Maybe we've got, something else. But ultimately, they're going to need to see something to give them some hope that there is a path forward, because that's you can talk yourself into believing anything, and if there's actually some substance to give a bit of foundation for what you're getting talked into, I think that becomes more believable then.
Andrew, is there a path with Trudeau still there? Could that case be made to caucus, not to try to push him over?
I think it's to Dan's point. I think you have to. Look, the first thing that's got to start is the Prime Minister. If there's a caucus meeting, I think he has to really demonstrate that he's ready and the fire's in the belly to get into this. I actually think that even though the writing was on the wall, I think the by-election result and the fallout and the response by some even caucus members and others around the party has kind of set him on the back foot at this point. I mean, he's limiting his media stuff. I'm told he's not going to the Stampede, which would be a bit unusual because I think he's gone just about every year. I think it's going to be really important that he, at the next caucus meeting, whenever it is, that he's there and he's ready to go. I mean, and to Dan's point, if you've got some proof points on Poilievre's vulnerabilities, which, look, there are some. I wouldn't discount those at all, and and to sort of really personally articulate his desire to go toe to toe and offer Canadians that choice. The path. The path when you look at the polling numbers is pretty narrow and pretty twisty. I mean, you've got Atlantic Canada where there's probably a bit of potential, and I think you can look at there. I think Dan's right that there's some upside provincially in New Brunswick for the Liberal brand, and perhaps you can pull on that a little bit. In Quebec, I mean, I think there's still going to be a solid the potential for some solid base, and I think at that point you start looking at what the new Liberal leader in Ontario can do in terms of building up the brand. But I think, quite frankly, I think Trudeau, I mean, he has proven to be a good campaigner. I think caucus will have to sort of see that kind of old Trudeau, that he's ready to get at it and take on, to sort of have a sense that, okay, like, because I think that's part of, to me, when I hear sort of the real desire for caucus meetings and things like that, I mean, they want to hear from the boss in terms of like what's going on. What are you saying?
That's an interesting point, actually, in the sense, I just find it interesting given what's going on in the US right now, because the concern there is not so much where they are in the polls, right? Like the Democrats are down by 2 or 3 points. It's certainly something they can make up. But everybody just has lost faith in Biden's ability to actually campaign, right? And his competency and what he's going to do on the campaign trail. Whereas I don't think anybody doubts that Trudeau can, bring not just a basic competency level, but like actually bring strong skills on the campaign trail and perform there. And I think, it's a different kind of question, I guess, that's sort of swirling around him. But, the thing that he can answer that Biden probably can answer is, as Andrew said, like he's got the fire, he's got the energy, he will perform well in the campaign. And I think that's something that can at least give Liberal caucus hope, right? That there is hope because, things can change in a campaign and we have confidence in his abilities. Whereas I think the problem the Democrats are facing right now is that they're just scared out of their minds about what Joe Biden's going to say if he's on the mic for, 5 hours a day during the never-ending election campaign of the fall, right?
Right. But Dan, is a lot of this too baked in to move? Before the by-election, Trudeau was saying that people hadn't made up all their minds yet. But Trudeau is a good campaigner, but is that going to be, can that be really worth more than a couple points at this stage? Is his ceiling too low? And with Pierre Poilievre, are people's views of him still tentative, or are they baked in as well, that they really don't care about some of his vulnerabilities because out of the two, they might prefer him over Trudeau? Like, how much of this is still able to move between now and the next election?
Yeah, look, I think opinions of Trudeau probably are pretty firm. He's been around for so long that it's hard for people to. They know what they like about him. They know what they don't like about him, right? So I think the things that could change would be, what matters to voters if the ballot question shifts away from high interest rates, affordability, housing, if other concerns take over. That maybe shines a spotlight in areas where they have a bit more trust in Trudeau and the Liberals. So that's something that could change in the next year if Trump wins or if there's other issues that emerge. Like that's something that could shift the ballot question a little bit, which maybe works to the Liberals' advantage. I think the Poilievre question is less formed. I can't imagine that people have a large understanding of what Poilievre is about, other than that he's, he wants to get rid of the carbon tax and he's conservative, but that cuts both ways too. There's going to be concerns about cuts. There's going to be concerns about being far right. So I do think there's space to still define Poilievre. The Liberals haven't really fired that holster yet in terms of the big campaign to define Poilievre. So that is something that I think is still probably on the table that could shift opinions between now and in election day.
Andrew, what do you think in terms of how much of it is baked in?
Well, it's an interesting question because even when I was thinking back on just where we're currently at in the polls, and I mean, like I'm thinking this is getting into some fairly unprecedented territory in terms of this kind of healthy double-digit lead that one party has held. That's going into year 2 now, and conceivably, I mean, the question will be like, can this carry on until the fall of 2025? I mean, it would be actually, I think, fairly extraordinary in terms of that kind of polling dominance, and so and it got them there. It got the Conservatives there because I think they were first and quickest and clearest on affordability, and when that post-pandemic sort of narrative that they basically drove the post-pandemic narrative, and the affordability, everything is broken. They got on top of that, and they've sort of owned that, and the Liberals are playing catch up, and it's hard, especially when you're in government, because you kind of own a lot of problems, and you can't really fix some of those problems. They're really deep economic problems. And so for Poilievre, I'm not sure I mean, I agree with Dan that there's still there'll be some sort of definition, being applied by the Liberals, if not sooner, but definitely in the campaign. But if this general sort of sentiment in the public that affordability and housing affordability, availability, cost of stuff, if that doesn't change dramatically, I'm not so sure, impressions of who they're going to vote for is going to change very much either. I just see these as, the dominant issues, and for the Liberals, where they won in 2019 in part, on climate change, that they really had something to offer, and the Conservatives clearly didn't. Like it's now sort of a kind of a flip where on affordability, I mean, Poilievre has been on that so relentlessly that unless there's a way to sort of shake his ownership of that, and someone else can take it on, I'm not sure. It'll be difficult. I think it'll be difficult to really dramatically change things.
Andrew, do the Conservatives need to do anything this summer, or should they just step back and let what's happening with the Liberals continue?
I don't think they need to be, holding any big policy conferences where you get, 500 of them in a room to start talking about sales and come up with ideas, because you never know what that might look like. No, I think they'll focus on, obviously expanding, getting into some different communities, into different areas where they can still grow vote. Certainly in Ontario and the GTA, and I think they'll be looking now even in some of those Metro Toronto suburbs like Etobicoke and those areas. Candidate recruitment's going to be important. Again, the party's still riding high, and the conversation around Trudeau will make sort of the sentiment that this is a good party to be part of, and so they'll have some opportunities there. But I don't think they'll keep working hard and organizing, and like they always do, send a million emails out raising money. But I think that they'll look at this year. I mean, I looked at some polling from January. They were 41% in January, and they're 41% in June. They're probably saying to themselves, this has been a good stretch of Parliament, and this is a time now where voters tend to not want to get into a whole lot of in-your-face kind of politics, more friendly over a hamburger type of politics, and they'll be fine with that.
Dan, should the Conservatives try to push Trudeau over, or try to prop him up a little bit over the next few months?
Unless they want to cut a check for $5 million to the Liberal Party to run some ads, I don't know what they can do to help or hurt one way or the other. I think what they'd probably be doing, I think from a public perspective, no notes, like they're doing everything perfectly. So keep doing what you're doing. They don't need to change anything in terms of what they're doing from a forward-facing perspective. But, this is sort of the last full summer before we get into the election year. So I'd imagine this will be the time they're doing a lot of behind-the-scenes work in terms of getting ready for that campaign. I was working for the Liberal Party in the summer of 2014, and we were doing a lot at that time in terms of charting out what are the pathways to victory, both in terms of what are the ridings we think we can win, but also what are the demographic groups, a lot of big sample surveys to look at, not just like how we're doing among men and women, but like how are we doing with different ethnocultural groups, and where's the potential among people with young kids versus people with old kids, and like really slicing and dicing to try to figure out what do those pathways look like, what are the target voters we need to win over, and building that plan to victory. And I saw just from the financial returns, the Conservatives spent $1 million on polling and research last year. So obviously they're doing a lot of that, and I'd imagine a lot of that will go on this summer. As Andrew mentioned earlier, they'll be doing a lot of candidate recruitment, I imagine. Again, I remember in 2014, we were running a lot of riding polls to try to entice people like Amarjeet Sohi and Marion Monsef to run for us. And you do a poll and say, hey, look, you can win if you run for us. So go for the nomination. So I imagine there'll be a lot of that's going on behind the scenes as well, too. There'll be focus group in the platform. There'll be testing messaging. And even just, when you're in opposition, I think you've got more flexibility to just run experiments and try things. So I imagine their field team is experimenting with different tools for voter contact and different tools in terms of just running the field operations. They'll probably be talking to people in, after the UK election overseas in terms of what works and what doesn't work in terms of field operations. Same thing coming out of the US election. They'll find someone to give them some tips for things that work. So a lot of that will be going on behind the scenes. Yeah, we even did a lot of experimenting on the research side. I remember doing a big survey in 2014, just experimenting around like attack ads, and we had a big sample size online and mocked up basically 30 different versions of attack ads, and like how does this play if it's like the gray color versus a bright color, and if you use a picture of your opponent versus not, and if you use different words that are harder or softer. And it was really just kind of like to try things out and see what worked. And I think they've got a lot of money and they've got more time because they're not in government. So I'd
Yep.
imagine they're doing a lot of behind the scenes sort of tinkering and getting ready for the election campaign.
How about what's going to happen with the rest of the summer? So the Toronto St. Paul's by-election ended June and kicked off what's been a rough summer for the Liberals so far. But there are going to be some other hits that are going to be coming. There's the La Salle-Verdun by-election, which has to be called within the next few weeks. So there will be a vote there, either in August or September. There's the one in Elmwood-Transcona, which has to be called by the end of September. Whether those two will be joined up or not, the Liberals don't have a candidate in place in either of those. So tick-tock. And then there's the one in Cloverdale-Langley City, which can wait until the end of the year. They only have to call it at the end of November. And that one seems like a 100% chance of loss for the Liberals. So maybe they would want to either team it up with something else or
Right.
have it be all by itself. Andrew, I'd especially like to hear what your thoughts are on that Elmwood-Transcona by-election. Now, the Liberals aren't really in it,
No.
but it's still going to be an important race for the NDP and the Conservatives.
Yeah, out of the three you mentioned, I actually think it's the one that might be most interesting. And on this one, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's not this isn't something that's going to Liberals have to really they haven't won it. They tend to do sort of not very well. It's an NDP, traditionally an NDP riding, very blue collar, but unlike St. Paul's, Conservative has won this riding in this century, and so I would suspect that they're looking at it. It's also an interesting sort of sub story to that is that it's it appears to be hard for the NDP to win that if they don't have a Blaikie on the ballot. It was a long held seat by Blaikie Senior, and then Daniel took it back from the Tories in I think it was in 2015. So
Yeah.
and then held it since. So it'll be interesting. I mean, I would suspect that similar to St. Paul's, I think the Conservatives won't be overly bullish about what could happen there. I mean, it's still a pretty blue collar union type riding, but I think they and some of the polling has talked about the fact that part of Poilievre's appeal and his message has tapped into some of that traditional NDP kind of union support, a la sort of Doug Ford in Ontario in the last election. So I think that'll be, and I think that has the potential, that result in that riding has the potential to for Jagmeet Singh do what Justin Trudeau is kind of experiencing. Like you could get a bit more grumbling, pardon me, in his caucus about, hey, like we've tied ourselves pretty close to the Liberal government. Are we being guilt by association here, and this could be trouble for me in my area in Hamilton, for example, or in some of those lower mainland seats where the NDP opponent is a Conservative opponent. So I think that one's got some interesting potential.
It's actually interesting. The
Go ahead.
NDP won Elmwood-Transcona by 22 points in 2021. The Liberals won St. Paul's by 23 points in 2021. So there are some eerie, nervous, similarities there. Now the NDP aren't down by as much as the Liberals are nationally, and they've got the Wab Canoe effect, which seems to be
Correct.
boosting them up in Manitoba a fair bit. So I think that probably gives them some a bit more comfort, but like they haven't done very well in any by-elections at all. Like I can't remember the
Yeah.
last time they had a good by-election. So it's I think this will be a test for them for sure.
Dan, how would the Liberals be approaching the other races? Would it make sense to put them together, to keep them separate? Because even if they're not in contention, Elmwood, Transcona, if they end up with 6%, that's still not going to be a great story, even if they're a subplot. Like how should they approach these three by-elections? Because one of them has to happen before the summer's over.
Yeah, and it kind of goes to our question before, right? There's a lot of moving parts and dynamics to figure out when you're timing out these by-elections. I think if we're looking at this pretty objectively, like you said, they're going to lose Langley, so that's going to be a bad news story. Elmwood, I mean, could be a bad news story. If the NDP lose that right, no one's going to care if the Liberals got 6% or 15%. The story is going to be the NDP loss. So maybe that's a good distraction from other bad news stories. Whereas, I think they probably hold Lametti's old seat in Quebec. If they lose that one, that becomes another huge negative. But I would think they're probably going to win that one. So yeah, I think there's interesting timing, especially as we talked about, the importance of the fall caucus meeting for the Liberals. Do they want to have maybe the Quebec and Manitoba by-elections before then, and if they hold the Quebec one, at least maybe that makes caucus a bit more reassured. I would probably not want to call Langley heading into to a caucus meeting in the fall. I think that could really create some more internal frustrations, angst, concerns. So yeah, I think a lot of moving pieces there that they're going to have to sort out. And as you said, like having a candidate in place is the first step there. So I think they're obviously working on that behind the scenes.
All right. Well, we'll see what happens, and we'll definitely get a chance to chat again after that La Salle-Verdun by-election, because as I said, clock's ticking on that one. So
Sure.
in the meantime, James, I don't think was able to get off the dock, so unfortunately we couldn't chat and see what his views are on the NDP, but hopefully we'll chat with him at the end of the summer. So to the both of you, thanks so much for joining me, and enjoy the summer, and we'll chat again. We'll chat again when there's more drama to discuss in Canadian politics.
Will do. Have a good summer.
Yeah, sounds great. Look forward to it.